Margaret. Always a pleasure to uh, share ideas with my friends in BCS, which I've been doing since time immemorial. What? Before we move on from the first slide, notice the QR. Get your camera up and get yourself a copy of the slides. We'll do that later, and we'll, um, if all else fails, send me an email and I'll send you the link. But there's a lot of detail here and there's a lot of links to free things that you won't be able to pick up as I'm talking. So I'd advise you to, get yourself a copy of the slides. Feel free to share them with any good friends, and off we go. Okay, so my talk is, you see, titled Strategy Engineering. So it's about strategy. It's about strategic planning and implementation. And the twist is that we're throwing in that word engineering, which means not a lot of nice sounding management mumbo jumbo, but in fact, numbers and structure like a good engineer. So I'm trying to raise the game of the managerial class, make them into, I don't know, management engineers or something like that. But I think if we're going to do strategic planning seriously, then we have to go this route of becoming more numeric and less blah, blah, blah. Okay. There's a textbook which you can have. There's the link to it, the Strategy Ring textbook, and that will, and you can share that with anybody too, which, if you like, is the detail backing up this talk. Let's see. Oh dear. That was really silly. I managed to push the link. Let's see. We get
You look as if you're having a wonderful time in Norway.
Yeah, that's my wife's 80th birthday party and my four sons. Let's see. And we're sharing. Okay. Share Zoom workplace. Okay. Something. Yeah. Well, we're back. Okay. So, and people still coming in. Okay. Sorry about that. Maybe it will be edited out or something nice like that. So some very basic definitions. Now, the word strategy probably has as many definitions as people who write about it. But so I'm going to define it my way. And when I use the word, that's what I'm doing. And you can define it your way. We can even have a friendly competition, which way is the best or what. But I'm going to do something in this talk. I'm going to be quite original compared to all literature and papers and talks about strategy because I'm going the engineering route, right? So forgive me if I am creative and original, but it's in aid of doing better strategy. So here's my definition of strategy. A strategy is the means, ends and means, right, by which systems generate or produce some attributes. Now, the attributes they produce are performance attributes, which includes all qualities of the system, all the abilities, and resource attributes, which are things like time, money, uh, human capability, space, and things like that. Okay. So it produces attributes. Okay. So strategy's job is to produce improvements in these attributes, better qualities, better access to resources to get things done. Now, they produce them at the next higher level up. We're going to look at levels, so that'll become a little bit more clear. But there, if you like, everybody's producing for their boss or the next level up in the organization, and there can be many levels. So simple on the one hand, but in fact very and not completely at odds with thinking on strategy. Conventional thinking on strategy says there's some visions or north stars or something you want to attain, and then strategy is the process of figuring out what strategies you're going to do to get there. So this is not radically different, but I'm being very, very specific about the fact that strategy is the means by which we generate and then multiple performance quality values and other values called resources at the next level higher up. Now, I'm going to suggest that the strategic attributes, these things here, are what you really want. And this thing we call strategies, the thing you do, you implement, really is just a hypothesis, which could be right or wrong, or partially right, partially wrong, about about how to get there. Now let's take a look at a visual here. Here we have this big strategy hypothesis. This is the big strategic idea or the collection of maybe a set of strategies. And I believe we need to decompose this big idea, which might take 4 years to implement, into smaller ideas. Whether these are weekly or monthly, we can argue about, or even for some extremists, daily. But we decompose it, and then we have what I call evolutionary steps or smaller strategies. And we implement these smaller strategies, and hopefully, every time we implement a little bit of this big strategy idea, we increment the value a little bit every time we do it. And as we move along, we finally get to the goal. So this is symbolically one value or quality, one performance characteristic. And this represents a point on the scale of measure where we have enough to be successful. We're happy. Okay. So what I'm saying here by strategy is that we're primarily trying to reach the goal. And we have a way of doing it called think about a good strategy and then try it out. And if it works, keep it. And if it doesn't work, don't keep it. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat this way of thinking many times during the talk. So if you didn't quite get it all, don't worry. Just wait, reread the slides of the book or whatever it is. Now, I'm also stating that when stating what our strategy is, I actually think, and this is new thinking, that stating the strategic attributes, in other words, how good we want it to be, what we really want is the smartest way of stating our strategy. And this thing we've been calling the strategy up to now, we need to put the word hypothesis behind it. In other words, it's a theory of what we ought to do. But if it doesn't work, that doesn't matter. We still want what we really want, the strategic attributes. And we've got to dump that strategy idea that doesn't work or partly doesn't work and find one that does give us what we really want. In other words, I'm saying that the smartest way of stating strategy is in terms of multiple performance and quality characteristics on the one hand and resource characteristics on the other. Way of saying that's what we want in our future. Okay, we want very high quality with and plenty of resources to deal with the world. Let's call that budgets and things and good deadlines. And that's what we really want. Okay, now I'll explain these things more as we go along. But now I decided to start the talk with an example which will be very many things at once, but it'll be a reference point for us as we proceed in the talk. So I took a real company, Graphmetrics, of which I'm an investor. My son is the uh, COO, and we have just begun to get real clients to really pay after a few years of building it. It's sort of an AI database product. You can look it up. And I thought I'd do a little bit of strategic planning for that real company using Perplexity. So here is the prompt. You can try it out yourself for your own company with suitable modifications. And the first thing I asked it for is how we think in my planning language, language, which we'll get introduced to, that who are our stakeholders? Okay. Now, notice what I did not say. I did not say the conventional our customer or our user with the use case and user stories. I think that is narrow, dangerous, old-fashioned, especially at the strategy level, right? I believe that we have to look at our critical stakeholders, and our critical stakeholders are order of magnitude 10 or 20 at least. Maybe they are 100, but maybe we should at least focus on the top 10, and rather than only focusing on one like the customer or two like the customer and user, which is the bad habit given to IT people. Anyway, so it identifies some stakeholders for a company like that. And I said, tell me what values they have. Now, remember, a synonym for value is often quality, qualities. Okay, and the quality group is sponsoring the talk, so got to keep that in mind. Um, and job security is definitely a quality that employees prefer. But I said, give me three of the values that this stakeholder would have. So we're beginning to get an idea of what future value improvements do we have to work towards with our strategic planning. Okay, and it doesn't matter whether this is right or wrong. What you'll find is damn good. It's much better than almost any human being I've met at BCS and trained, including myself, at giving a really good list of stakeholders. If I did this, I'd remember 10 of them and forget 10 of them, and so would you. And then it's much better than most humans are at figuring out which values they have. I'd remember one, maybe two, but I'd certainly be forgetting one or two also. Okay, so try this out with the company or your own company or your own projects. Now, the next prompt said, okay, using these values, let's get really clear on them. Let's take 15 of the most critical values and using our planning language, which is my method, which I've been teaching for over a decade to large numbers of British Computer Society people. I hope some are in there listening, getting a review. And so it picks the most critical. By the way, I'm asking it to judge what are the most critical. And believe you me, if I ask exactly why it did it, it'll give you some pretty good reasoning. But I'm not bothering with that here. But it doesn't pick at random. It's not hallucinating. And anybody can read this list and say, yeah, data security is very important. And employee turnover is very important, etc. Okay. Anyway, now what we're going to do here is this is the engineering bit. I would say stakeholders and values is a structure, which is an engineering structure. And just looking at a user or a customer is an old-fashioned IT way of thinking, which was good for its time, but it's outdated now certainly for strategic planning. Anyway, so here's the list of the 15 that it's picked, as good as any. And then I said, define a scale of measure. Okay. It's not very good at that there, but I'm not going to give it a hard time. You'll find better examples of that later. And it's also going to define what I call a meter, which is the test process. How are we going to measure where this thing is as we march towards our great future of reaching our 10-year goal, which is here? how are we going to measure it? What method will we use? What process? Okay, so this is engineering, right? What's the scale of measure? How are we going to measure it? And then on that scale of measure, we have 3 points. How bad are we now? It's making an educated guess. How good at the very least, the worst acceptable case should we be in 3 years? So it's sort of a mid-range, idea of marching right along there. And in the long term, which could be 5 years or 10 years, so I've set 10 years here, what level would be successful and good enough for government purposes? Okay, so this is using a quantified structure, which can be used for absolutely any quality, any value, any performance characteristic, any resource, and any variable constraint. Won't get into that. Okay, I asked it, tell me which stakeholders are very interested in data security, and give me some references to literature. Sometimes it'll give you, the exact URLs and you can look them up. It's not very good at that here, but I haven't bothered it. Okay, so I'm showing you in a nutshell, when I talk about value and values, um, I'm I'm talking about quantifying and structuring them so nobody can misunderstand. Everybody has to agree that when we're talking about data security, this is the official scale of measure. This is where we officially are. This is where we have to get to in the short term, and this is where we're aiming for the long term. And these are the stakeholders we're trying to please getting there. Okay, more detail about these things here. By the way, I'm starting to do what I call the EVO cycle, which we'll talk a lot about. And the first part of the EVO cycle was getting the stakeholders, previous slide, and that also introduced a little bit of the values, but here we're doing the value statements and structuring and quantifying them and maybe getting agreement that there's one and only one definition of data security for our strategic thing. People are not at liberty to interpret data security however they wish, which would be chaos, confusing, and a good way of sabotaging your project. By the way, the literature, Glegg's book, um, stated that strategic planning is believed to fail totally 90% of the time at least, and some situations 98% of the time. So that's how bad strategic planning is. By the way, if I give any references to books like Glegg, you'll find 4 pages of references, like under G for Glegg, that particular very detailed handbook on strategic planning. So you can find it. Okay, now next, I gave a prompt and said, "Hey, find me 15 strategies. Oh, by the way, I want cost-effective strategies." What does that mean? It means they're effective in delivering the values that we just looked at, delivering this stuff, and they don't cost much money and time and good people. And it knows what I mean, and it does it pretty well. And you can actually ask for deep reasoning, how effective. In fact, we'll see an example of that in the next slide anyway. But it's not just a management bullshit. It is actually engineering with reasoning behind it. Anyway, so I want 15 cost-effective strategies to meet as many of the values and as much of the goal at lowest costs. I'm really helping define what I mean by it. And then here we have then 15 strategies. Not that we couldn't get 30 strategies if we ask for them, but I've got to fit it on a slide and doing a lecture anyway, so I limited myself to 15. When you've done the first 15, you can then start doing the next 15. Don't worry, there's always one more, okay? So here I've given it a little name tag so we can refer to it on elsewhere on tables, as you'll see. Here's a short description, and it'll give you as long a description as you want. Okay, I mean, it'll decompose every one of these into 10 sub-steps with a whole page of description and things. Anyway, some references to where it, some reading to do. which of the values will be impacted, market share, client retention, brand reputation, by this strategy? Good. But that means if we've got 10 values, at most three of the 10 were impacted to some degree, not fully. They didn't get to the goal level. And so that's good, but we need more strategies, obviously, to tackle all the strategies all the way to the goal. Oh, by the way, would you estimate very roughly the capital expenditure and the operating expenditure annually for this strategy? Nice to get a rough idea. And believe me, it will tell you exactly how it arrived at the number. Sometimes it is rough because, as it says, you haven't given it enough detail to be any better. But it's better than most human beings at getting some idea of what things will cost for the same information. And then, which of the stakeholders are you making happy? Well, that's three of them: clients, strategic partners, and investors. But not the the rest of the 15 stakeholders. So again, we need more strategies to begin to please all the stakeholders. So what we're doing, we're at step 3 of the EVO cycle, the strategy planning. Oh, we said, by the way, will you give us a little priority rating, the value to cost level for each one of these? And it does so, which is very nice of it. Okay, so you're getting an idea what I mean by strategies here. Okay, so the next thing I say is, look, I want to look at all these strategies. I want to look at all these strategies, the top 10, in terms of how they impact all my values or qualities. Okay, and so I'm going to do it on a table where here's my data security strategy, and what is the impact on, for example, data security? Oh, well, 95%, not surprisingly. That's an estimate. That's a guess. It may be wrong, but I've asked it to guess, and it guesses. That data security strategy isn't very good, like 0 on time savings and 0 on client intent, and only 1% on revenue per employee. So it's very, very strong in this one area and weak on others. But other strategies will have multiple effects. Here, 5% here, 90% here, 90% here, 10% here. Good multiple effects on many strategies. What are we doing here? I'm trying to teach you a method that I've invented called an impact estimation table. There is a little free book on it, Value Impact Estimation Table book. Okay. But it allows us to do something that it's very difficult to do in your mind, but it's very easy to do on a table or a spreadsheet. And to juggle, the top 10 strategies against the top 10 values or costs or something like that, and get an overall picture. One thing you can do with this table, aside from realizing that you have to look at the multiple effects of strategies, they don't just have one dominant effect, is to say, well, if we sum up these numbers and look at the highest number, which just happens to be this one, we get an idea that says, well, this is actually the most highly rated strategy. Maybe we should start with that one. It helps us prioritize and say, let's work with that one first, because that one strategy gives us a lot of bang for our quid, or pro for the quid, as I sometimes translate to British. Um, Now, it's a little bit lopsided because almost all of this number came from that one number there, but the principle is the same, that, we can use it to prioritize or rate the different strategies in terms of their overall contribution to our many values, and it gives us a starting point. Finally, I said, take that strategy, the security one, by the way, and decompose it into steps, or let's call them sub-strategies, okay? And decompose it into steps that'll take about 1 week. So here's week 1, week 2, week 3, right? Now we're, by the way, now we're talking agile, if you didn't recognize it, incremental delivery of value. And tell us what kind of value you think we would expect to get, how much of it, 5%, and then, every week, how much. So we can see if that week step was as good as we thought it might be or not. And tell us how we're going to measure it and give us some technical references. These are a lot of security references, not surprisingly. So ideally, we take this one strategy of the 10 and we decompose it into things to do, and we can then attempt to deliver them in sequence, maybe in sequence of the best value for the week, okay? The efficiency of it. And then hopefully, more or less, we'll every week see the value going up in the direction of the goal level, in which case that's our done symbol where, we stop at the goal. That's all we need. Okay. By the way, this whole thing took, all of 10 minutes. I can do this anytime in 10 minutes with anything. And I'm using the free version of Perplexity. So you can't get a better, start your strategic project hypothesis going. Now, here's the Evo cycle we were working with, right? Stakeholders, values, strategies, decomposition, and then we have things we haven't talked so very much about, but basically we make that step, and then we deliver the step. We integrate it into the real system, the old system, whatever, and then we measure how well we're doing delivering the strategy, and then we learn how good it was. If it's good, keep it. If it's bad, dump it and try again, or try with the next strategy. You got to get something working. Now, this Evo cycle, one point I want to make about it, it's a very basic tool you can use at any level of strategic planning. Okay. So at the outer level, we can just for fun call that the visionary level, the CEO board level. And then maybe here, the CTO, COO, CIO, we use the same thing to do the long range plan. And then down at the project level, we use the same thing to do the project plan, and then sub projects, etc. So the point I'm making is that this Evo cycle is fractal and scale free. Fractal means we use the same regime, the same basic ideas at any level of the organization. In other words, the techie is using the same method as the CEO and board level. Interesting idea of talking the same language. And scale free means it works on, the largest imaginable strategic planning, like, I don't know, shall we say, worldwide tariffs for the US and China and everybody else. And then but it will also work at the frozen fish tariff for Norway, which is pretty small by comparison to everything else. Okay. Now, here is another view. This is a view of different levels. Let's just say this is your top level, the CEO board level. This is the one or more things they want to achieve, the values. This is the big strategy idea, which hopefully gives us that. Okay. And then the next level below, think of it as the CTO level. Um, we have a big technical strategy, how we're going to do the IT, etc., and what values we're going to deliver. Now, the value we deliver here has to be of such a nature that it will cause the higher level. Like here is maybe more sales, and this is more AI type like product or something like that. And here were some strategies like, here was use automation to the greatest degree, and here's use AI perplexity or something like that. If you want to get a better practical idea of this, I found that this example of starting with rewards for skilled designers and working your way up to value growth helps us understand these different layers that we have to deal with in strategic planning. Whereas most of us IT people were down here at the bottom, and our top managers are up there at the top. Okay, but we need to align, as the managers like to say, with each other. Now, notice that this pattern here, big strategy gives value, and value at level below causes this, and the second level strategy hopefully gives the value that causes. This is fractal. We're using exactly the same pattern at all levels of the organization. And we're still humbly calling that strategy a hypothesis until proven by the measurement that it gives what it's supposed to. And we're still focusing not on the strategy, which is technical guesswork or architecture. We're focusing on the attributes that we want to have in order to cause better attributes, let's say profit and sales at a higher level. Now, what is my radical view of strategy? Well, I've already told you one part of it. I've told you that we need to become engineers and do engineering. And that's not something most of our top managers are trained in. If they wanted to become an engineer, they probably would have become an engineer and not gone to business school. So a bit of a sell. I've always found that my methods sell best to companies that are engineering companies and have top managers who actually have an engineering degree for some strange reason. But now we need to sell it to all the rest of them, like the civil servants running the police service or the National Health Service, and that they have to be engineers. And maybe we should avoid using the word engineering, would just be systematic and effective or something like that, and get the prime minister to say we need to be more systematic and effective. But that's what it means. So that's the first thing. My other radical view is that we need to focus not on the design, which is the traditional way of looking at it, but we need to focus on the actual attributes that we're after, and the design is just a hypothesis. Now, what I've done also, my primary trade is not strategies. That's Johnny come lately for me because I got involved with it with some friends, but um, the but I have been doing design all my 50 years of my life, and architecture and technical things like that. And what I recognized when I started looking more deeply at strategies was the fact that what managers call the strategy, a more technical person would call the design or the architecture, because both of them are simply the means to some ends. Now, it turns out I'd written a little booklet called A General Theory of Design Engineering, free copy. So I thought, wow, I've got a whole general theory of design engineering. Now, if design and strategy are just the same thing by a different name, then I have a whole theory of strategy here. In fact, all I really have to do is take this book and do a little replacement of the word design with the word strategy, and I would suddenly have a general theory of strategy engineering. Now, having thought that thought, I did it. I used about half an hour, went through the 185-page book and replaced the word design with the word strategy. And half an hour later, I had a 200-page book on a general theory of strategy engineering, as, if you like, a joke for this talk. But it's not a joke. You can go get the book and see that it's quite a bit deeper than anybody I know or could find ever wrote about a general theory. This is sort of academic things, strategy engineering. By the way, to have a general theory, the academics require about 18 different things like principles and case studies and glossaries. And it turns out I have all that stuff. And so I can be a candidate for Tom's general theory of strategy engineering. I'm looking forward to meeting some academics who'd like to help me bring this forward into the academic sphere. Will the other academics, because I'm not an academic, acknowledge that I have a general theory of strategy engineering, hopefully the best one around. Now, when looking at strategy, there's something else that I want to emphasize at the top level. It's a really simple idea. What are your priorities? It's not finding strategies. It's not finding the values or the stakeholders. It's very simple. It's succeeding in business or succeeding in the organization you're working in. And succeeding means meeting the performance goals, the values and qualities that you have to meet, whether you know it or not to begin with. You have to meet to be competitive and to win. Okay. Now, I've written a whole book about that you can have called Success, with the world's only double duplicate acronym, just for fun. Okay. So, really, at the highest level of strategy, it's not about strategies. It's not about North Stars, because they could be wrong too. It's about learning what values you really have to deliver in order to succeed in a changing market where all your competitors are radically changing technologically and politically and economically as we speak. Yesterday's success may be tomorrow's failure. So, in other words, it's not about quantifying the values you're going to have in the future and then marching towards them. It's quantifying the best values you can for today, and then learning that many of those values are wrong. We need more of them more quickly, and changing those, and then changing the strategies to get there. Okay, very dynamic game. And to play this very dynamic game that people in Washington and China are playing right now as we speak, watch the news, we need some tools which allow you to deal with multiple factors simultaneously, like on a spreadsheet or in another tool, and keep on adjusting things at least week by week, if not, as we're learning, day by day. So how can strategy planners master this topic? Well, in a nutshell, I give you a free copy of my 400-page book, Competitive Engineering. That's got all this stuff about quantifying values and identifying stakeholders and impact estimation tables, the whole engineering. Okay. It is the handbook that defines the planning language I've referred to. It is an engineering way of doing agile. I sometimes speak about agile engineering for those who are very interested in, now that I've lost my job as an agile coach, what do I do now? The answer is very simple. You have to deliver quantified, early, and frequent results. How are you going to do that? Well, here's a textbook on how to do it. And we have lots and lots of case studies of actually doing it for real businesses in the world in a book called PPPP, if you want to look it up. Okay. Now, and there are plenty of case studies here too. Okay, so in other words, what we need to get going is a value stream, an early, meaning next week, the first week. And you're not going to plan for a year. You're going to plan for a week or a weekend, and then you're going to go start delivering strategy subsets, and you're going to do it every week continuously. You're going to measure every week whether you actually march forward, and this becomes your stream of results. Okay, and that'll make you look so good that people will want to hire you as a consultant or an employee, compared to all those people with certificates who never delivered any quantified results ever. That's why they got fired or not hired, in case you want my opinion. They did agile the wrong way. They did agile as a cycle of producing code or work, rather than as a quantified value stream. Hope I'm hitting some of you are wondering, where did my job go? What am I going to do? Here's another view of the same thing. Let's call it the harmony view. I discovered my good old friend, now no longer with us, Fred Brooks, had written a wonderful book called Design of Design that I didn't even know about. And he had a whole chapter about harmony or balance as the real objective of architecture, which is his subject, design and architecture. And most of the textbooks on strategies emphasize, maximizing this, like profit or market share, winning, very American way of thinking. I like to think that we Europeans are not quite as fanatic on the Trumpian notion of winning and getting the most. But what about harmony, living together in reasonable harmony? America, China, Europe, wouldn't that be nice? Okay. And I think proffer this idea that the real objective of strategic planning should be, let me call it stakeholder harmony. In other words, all the players are feeling pretty good about life. It's not perfect, it's not maximized. The moment you maximize any one thing, you're probably going to penalize some stakeholder who will be mighty unhappy. We had some really good illustrations of that in the tariff fund last week. Okay. China, would you like 125% tariff? No. Okay. Anyway, so let me suggest a new game, harmonization game. And the harmonization then is using the Evo cycle to find strategies which deliver values that lead to harmonization. Okay. And I've got a book called Optima, which you can look up, which is a whole book on how to achieve harmony amongst stakeholders with values, if you want to go in that. And another corresponding one, I've got one for startups called Startup, and it's for European startups that are trying to make the world a better place, as opposed to American startups, which are trying to get rich quick. I think is the wrong focus. So beware of American methods and philosophies. They are highly corrupt. And if you didn't know it before Trump got into play, again, now you know it. Okay. Um, so now we've got about a quarter of an hour, and I'm going to take a deep breath, get a little drink of water, give you another chance to get the slides, the QR. And at least do a few more slides before we, at the top of the hour, just stop, no matter what. I'm a fanatic on well-defined things. In language, I have a glossary of 700 defined terms. And when doing language, you define all your project special terms very well, with scale and meter and goal. So I'm just fanatic on, we really need good definitions to communicate, to align with each other. And we're not very good at it. It's amazing how many strategy methods are just blah, 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 nice sentences on a PowerPoint with, a number. And no wonder strategy fails, because they fail to communicate clearly about anything. And we need to be clear about everything. Okay. So I've defined planning. It's not unlike what we did before, the conscious act of seeking what to do to finally get into balance for your stakeholders. Okay. Um, Strategy Ring is the title of the main free book. And it's sort of a little bit of a joke, because here is my cycle or ring, and this is my strategy ring. But it's also a little joke, strategeering, in other words, engineering. A little bit of a joke there. At least I think it's funny. And then here's my definition of engineering if you need it. Okay. Now, here are some detailed things. We've covered some of them, like fractal, scale-free, indirectly, strategy creation process, and strategy hypothesis. But here are the longer definitions as I would pin them down. And you're at liberty to disagree, and you're at liberty to make them better, and you're at liberty to suggest I make mine better. I'm really in a very early stage. We're still writing the strategy ring book, still added, like I added some chapters a few days ago on the graphical ability, trying to compete a little bit with my friend Simon Wardley of Wardley Mapping in doing things graphically. You'll find that in the new copy of the book. Here's a lovely picture about fractals. And here are some more definitions: strategic attributes, alignment, aligned attributes, and things like that. And then let's see. Here's a very basic model. This oval is the scope, the functionality, what the system does, and its constraints. Okay. And this can be a whole lot of detail. And then what I've called resources are things like deadlines, budgets and human effort. And they're symbolized graphically by an arrow because they're all variables. And then this is the deadline. This is the budget level. And then our various performance characteristics, our values and qualities, symbolized by a few generic ones here, like competitiveness. They have a goal. Okay, so this model in simple form says this is the game. You've got to understand the market you're in, or the government department you're working for, what it does, and then you need to understand the resources you have, and maybe talk about resources you might have if you got a higher budget or more time or more people. And then you need to talk about what do we have to do to be as good as we should be according to what the prime minister and the electorate expects, or whatever it is. And that's these things here. This is your basic graphical model of these ideas. Going a little bit deeper into the attributes, here's my favorite map of the idea of a requirement. Here is the performance requirement I've been talking about. By the way, the number here indicates formally defined term in the glossary of the competitive engineering book. So you can look up my definitions. And then what are performance requirements? Well, as I hinted, they consist of quality requirements, all the good things we value, and resources and workload capacity, things like that. And here are other kinds. If you want to get advanced requirements, you have to understand it's not about user stories or use cases. Many are locked into that oversimplified, disastrously, dangerously narrow view of things. You have to get a condition constraint might be a requirement, that it has to be legal in the European Union, even if we're not in. And design constraint might say we have to design so that we do not incur additional technical debt without even knowing about it. Okay, and things like that. So there are all kinds of interesting. Here's the vision, the top level strategy notion, and I've written a whole book called Vision Planning, which you'll find in the back there for top managers, free book. Okay, so here are some blah 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 from me, but point is there are many different related terms. They're all related to the idea of what we call a requirement. In other words, a future state we want, which is very basic to what strategic planning is all about. And some simplified, just talking about the North Star. Okay. So now, just for fun, I went to my friend ChatGPT and I took this the whole book of strategy ring, and the general theory for strategy engineering. I plugged in, and I said, please explain to anybody who wants to know what the strategy ring has to offer of better stuff. What is new? 10 different things, and why is it significant? Now, I'm not going to read all that out to you, but if you want to sort of go back and summarize what Tom was sort of bragging that he had some good shit there, what was it? And this is almost like an independent view. This is not me telling you how good it is directly. I am feeding in my method to ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is comparing this with everything it knows about strategy, which turns out to be quite a lot, and it's saying what is new compared to what's out there in the literature, and why is that important. Um, if you think my talk is complicated and a lot of pages and a lot of books, don't worry. I can summarize everything into one line. We need to get successful strategy through systems engineering and using some social arts. Oh, what are the social arts? Well, they're trying to deal with this famous strategic friend from a man I met once called Peter Drucker from Vienna. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, so the social arts are to do with the culture. And if you don't, and I've got a whole chapter in the Strategy Ring book about the social arts. We're going to slide on it coming up if I get that far in the next 7 minutes. And if I don't, you can look it up. Here's a one paragraph summary. I've just highlighted one thing, like, for God's sake, don't oversimplify it because you're lazy or ignorant. You've got to deal with the real factors that will cause you to succeed and fail, whether you like it or not. You've got to quantify your values, whether you like it or not. And if you don't, you will be the 98% failure in strategies. Of course, you'll blame somebody else, like it was very complicated, or Donald Trump or Elon Musk. Blame somebody, anybody except you. I think that's what Trump does, isn't it? Blame anybody except Trump. Oh, well. Here's another one-page summary of the whole thing. I like to summarize everything with principles of this and that, but these are principles of strategic planning. And I've highlighted one of them just to, because I can't do all of them, but that we need to invoke design or architecture. Fred Brooks. We need to design our strategies so that they will meet the ambitious values we need in the future, and they will deliver with the costs we can afford to pay. And this idea of designing, of architecting, it's sort of there, but I don't think they're very good at it. I don't think they understand what design is. I don't think, for example, they understand you have to design towards a set of quantified values, because they never show this in the books, and they never teach you to do it, okay? And let alone simultaneously delivering 5 different kinds of lower cost by design. So I have a booklet called Cost Engineering, find the back, which goes into detail about how to do this. 5 more minutes. Um, I had some fun with AI, comparing, like, some friends of mine think Roger Martin's a wonderful strategist, and indeed I'm sure he is. So just for fun, I asked AI to pick some dimensions of strategic planning and tell us what Roger Martin stands for, and then what Tom Guild stands for. I hope I agree with that. Um, and what I really want to teach here is that when you're looking at different strategy methods, which is what you're doing on this meeting right now, you can always analyze them on multiple values, right? And then how good they are, and any number of them. So this is really an impact estimation table with just words, okay? Um, let's see. What's wrong with strategic planning? Again, a little bit of help from AI, but for example, unclear objectives, the blah blah blah. We need to improve customer service. Well, what we do is say you don't use these bullshit words. You define a scale of measure and you define levels, and then you have a clear idea that you can engineer your strategy with and achieve something you've agreed to. This thing will get misunderstood by everybody because it's full of, improve how much by when. What is exactly a customer? Is it the same as a user, or is it just the guy who pays the bill? What is a service? Our services or their services? I mean, this is like a trap. Anyway, we can analyze, what's wrong. Sorry, meeting chat accidentally. 3 more minutes. Okay. So there's the Evo cycle. I did something last night after a conversation with a friend of mine, Marcin in Poland, where we were thinking about the best way of modeling strategies is not in writing with tables and numbers. You might even think I said that, but the best way, the best model of a real organization, a real system, is the real organization or system itself. And that's what I'm really saying. So I took the Evo cycle last night, and I said, I said, this part here, this is theory. You know, who are stakeholders, quantify their values and strategies, and decompose them. But okay, time to stop. But um, but here is the part I'm really trying to sell you, that you always start with a real system, and it's usually the old bad system that you hate. You don't start building a new system from scratch and wait 4 years and then surprise everybody with it. You start with your old system, no matter how bad it is, your living organization, and you move in the direction of better and better qualities and values and costs for example, weekly cycle. And I thought I was so pleased with that. You know, last night, I mean, like 1 in the morning, I managed to get this message across that the best model for strategic planning is the real system itself. And now I'm forced to stop there. You'll find some more slides, but I'm going to just shut up anyway.